The American Civil War is the bloodiest event in our nation's history. It pitted brother against brother, father against son, and has affected and touched every American from 1861 to today. It is an event that still has a very heated and ongoing debate surrounding it. But to truly understand the war itself, we must look at why, at the causes. In order to understand whether the causes suggested are true, good, and virtuous reasons for war, we look to just war theory. Just war theory was first developed by Augustine. Since it has been tweaked, modernized, and worked on by many great theologians and canonists. There are 6 pillars that make up the foundation for just war theory. First, just cause. The war is an attempt to avert the right kind of injury. Secondly, legitimate authority. The war is fought by an entity that has the authority to fight such wars. Third, right intention. The entity intends to achieve the just cause, rather than using it to excuse to achieve some wrongful end. 4, reasonable prospect of success. The war is sufficiently likely to achieve its aims. 5th, proportionality. The morally weighted goods achieved by the war outweigh the morally weighted bads that it will cause. 6th and final, last resort. There is no other less harmful way to achieve the just cause. After analyzing these, I have concluded that the South was the just party in entering into the Civil War, as I will attempt to show. The southern section of the United States had for some time before the Civil War slowly been made subjugate to the northern, so that the North had gained control of not just the Senate, the House of Representatives, or the Electoral College, but of all 3. They were able to do so not by natural means of population growth, etc., but by federal interference. The interference came in many different forms, such as acts like the Act in 1787, which prevented the South from the entirety of the land between the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, the Missouri Compromise, and the act which excluded the South from all of the Oregon Territory. The government also began to claim and maintain the right, in the last resort, to decide the extent of its powers. The government claimed the right to resort to violence to maintain whatever power it had claimed, against all opposition. The cause for the war, from the South's perspective, was an attempt to protect their rights as sovereign states. Still, the South took preventative steps to protect those rights, without war. They did so by seceding legally and then attempting to negotiate a peace with the Union, which they had once been a part of. When the offers of peace were refused, they weren't recognized as free and sovereign states, and the North publicly stated its intent to resubjugate the states of the South. The Confederacy still did not declare war. However, when the Union President Abraham Lincoln sent supplies to the fort within the expressed confines of the southern border, after expressly being told that doing so would be perceived as an act of aggression that would be repulsed with force, Confederate President Jefferson Davis did as he promised and attacked the fort. He did so in defense of his new founded country, his rights and liberties, and the principles in which he believed. The legitimate authority for the Confederate States of America can be found in the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution of the United States. This is a description of the colonies entering into the Articles of Confederation, as well as the reasoning behind why they would do so, from Jefferson Davis. Styling them as states, and then entering into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the securities of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all force offered to, or attacks made upon them, or any of them, on the account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretenses whatever. When the Articles of Confederation are abandoned for the Constitution, again, through various causes and careful wording, the states maintain their sovereignty. The purpose of the established union is again set at ensuring safety, peace, and sovereignty, so that when these purposes are no longer fulfilled, they are fully within their rights to secede and find a new way to maintain their safety, peace, and sovereignty outside of the Union. The intention of the South from the very beginning, all the way to the first shots that were fired, are clear. 1. The goal was first to attain the equilibrium which they had lost over the years to the North by obtaining new states to equal the number the North had. 2. After realizing that this would not be allowed by a North who now maintained complete power of the federal government, their goal became to leave that government which no longer represented them, so that they, the people, would have a new government that represented and protected their interests, and the interest of all of their people. Their goal was to keep that new founded government alive and safe from that greedy government which refused to give up its grasp on the people and land which it did not represent or protect. These goals are right and just. While the North may have had a higher probability of success, the South's probability was not unreasonable. Each side had their strengths and weaknesses, such as more weaponry for the North or better knowledge of land and battlefields for the South. Both sides were matched well enough to fulfill this pillar for just war theory. Proportionality is where much of the debate over the Civil War arises, because it calls into question morality. in which case most people will say the North was just, based simply on the fact that the moral evils of slavery were enough by far for war. Thus they close the case. Unfortunately, it is not half so simple. Slavery was undisputedly the object which sparked so much anger and tension between the sections. That was not because of the North's superior morality, but instead because stopping slavery from spreading stopped Southerners from spreading and kept them and their political beliefs and the Southern section confined to a small portion of the United States. So morally, the North had no higher ground to attack the South on. So then we look instead at their attempts to steal rights, hoard power, and maintain their security. The South's effort to maintain their rights and representation in a government is far more morally just. As has been pointed out, the South took many steps towards returning to a place of equilibrium without war. When these did not succeed, they still did not turn to war, but to secession. Unfortunately, the North continued to ignore the attempts at peace and friendship and forced the South's hand by sending supplies to a fort within the confines of the South after continued warnings not to do so, finally resulting in war. The South fulfills all pillars necessary for a just war. Their intent was not to gain money, power, or land, but instead to protect those objects and amounts which they already possessed. They fought for an established government of the people, by the people, with officials voted for and selected by the people, for the people. They had many great military minds and were fighting a defensive war on their own land, giving them a reasonable prospect of success. They fought for life, liberty, and happiness for every citizen in their state, and exhausted every avenue around war, which still achieved those goals, so that when they were finally forced to turn to war, it was a just war. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Trey, I just wanted to commend you for your topic. I was so excited when I read it. I had to come tonight to hear it. And it's so vital, I think, that I just think it's so lacking that Christians of today are unable to take just war theory and analyze our current conflict. And you picked one of the big three, one of the three so-called good wars,
yes,
the Civil War. That's awesome.
Yes, sir.
So from what you're saying, it's the South that started the war? Is that your...
So it's kind of foggy, I guess, in that arena. I would say that the North started in the sense that they left the South with no options. So in sending supplies and reinforcements to Fort Sumter after continued warnings and advisements from Jefferson Davis that doing so would lead to war and he would have to push back against that, they still decided to do so. So I feel like, in a sense, they were the first to fire, without a doubt, but they were left with no choice.
So, and what was the last principle was war should be a last resort, right?
Yes, sir.
So do you think that the North and the South, did they make every attempt to prevent war? Or did one do so more than the other? Or?
I would say that the South did so more than the North. In my readings and research, I found one document that was talking about some of the diplomats that were sent from the Confederate States to the North. They were ignored and kind of left to the side. They weren't talked to or addressed, and it wasn't until the day that they sent the reinforcements to Fort Sumter during the night. It wasn't until then that they reached out and said, "Hey, we're doing this. We're sending supplies into your so-called country against your will." So I feel like there was sort of a one-sided attempt at peace.
And okay, maybe this is a little off your research, but there are a lot of Christian traditions who reject just war, and they are purely pacifist. So can you make a case why just war theory is more appropriate than the pacifist position?
Well, I think we would have to turn to the Bible for that. I think it's clear all throughout the Bible that sometimes war is necessary. God causes people to war different times throughout the Bible. And so I would just point to that and say that if it is necessary or something that we as fallen humans will have to deal with. It's probably best that we have a set code that we can attempt to follow and use. Yes, sir.
I grew up within 10 miles of Bull Run Park, and so saw a lot of that. One of the interesting things about that was that the Northerners coming from Washington, D.C. came with their picnic baskets and their, and leading you to believe that they hadn't really counted the cost. And that's one of the things that you lay out there in the just war theory. You really think that that both sides really considered what it was going to cost, or were they just out of their league and not quite realizing what was really going to happen?
Yes, sir. I think definitely in the beginning, I don't think that either side knew just how devastating it was going to be, how long it was going to take to win the war for either side. Like you mentioned, there were people that thought it was going to be a one and done fight, and so they had their picnic baskets and they were going out to watch the Union beat the rebels, and it turned into a lot more than that. So I don't think either side was prepared for what it would be.
And a follow-up, it's always easier to look at that hindsight. I've always, growing up in Virginia, I always had sort of this general feeling for the South, but I look at that, and I think many of the people like Jackson, who was a fine Christian man, would feel like slavery would die of its own accord, and you just look at that and say, I don't think it would have died of its own accord. It's almost like God had to do that just to wake us up or something. There seems to be more going on. It's just, I wish I could go wholeheartedly with the Southern ideals, but when slavery does come up, you just feel like, I don't know if I can take that position. There's that moral feeling inside, and I'm sure you probably look at that.
Yes, sir. And one of the things I tried to do was focus mainly on what the war was in the beginning. A political, social, and monetary war. I think it was definitely a war for power and politics in the beginning, and not a moral war for either side, relating to the abolishment of slavery, or slavery as an evil. And yes, there are accounts of abolitionists and things like that in the North that definitely were attempting to make it that in the beginning, but it was a very small following. So in my thesis, I attempted to mainly focus on what it was in the very beginning.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that makes sense, because it was only halfway through when the North realized that, after this crucible, that was the principle that made sense.
Yes, sir.
We're going to have to limit questions to 5 minutes. No, that's fine. That's fine. Trey, you've done some great work that stimulated discussion and all of that. I do encourage you during the intermission or afterwards to speak with our scholars. If you have further questions for them, they will definitely benefit from that. All right. Thank you, Trey.
Thank you.